the activities that you have engaged in, which will contribute to increased confidence that is going to be shown by the stakeholders. So in other words, ladies and gentlemen, when you talk about enterprise risk management, you're talking about the overall management of risks that an organization faces or encounters from time to time. And the best way to manage these risks is to have what we call a risk register. And in the risk register, the organization will be able to identify all the risks that it faces. Then it will be able to identify or compute how much it stands to lose from that risk. That is the risk effect or consequence. Then it will be able to assign an individual in the organization who will be able to monitor and manage that risk. And from time to time, the person will be able to report to the management and those charged with governance on how the risk has been managed over time. Now then, we need to look at the types of risks that an organization can face. And these types of risks could include operational risks, which would entail customer satisfaction, product failure, integrity, reputational risk, and knowledge drain. For example, to pick reputational risk, if an organization's reputation is drained, if the reputation of an organization is at risk, then that means the organization may lose the customer base and it may not be able to do well or thrive in that organizational environment or in the environment in which it operates. For example, if an organization is dealing with the selling of seeds to farmers, and farmers start losing the reputation of that organization by saying that the seeds that they are giving them wither, the seedlings wither after a few months. If this information gets to the public knowledge, then, or the public domain, then the public may now have a reputation reduction in this organization, and therefore they may not purchase from this organization, given that it has been said they are an organization that sells seeds which are not up to the standard that is required, given that some farmers have complained that these do not, after germination, they wither. Now, the second type of risk that an organization faces is what we call the financial risk. And this will entail pricing risk. How do we price our products? And is there a risk in terms of our pricing? We talk about asset risks. We talk about currency risk. That is the risk that if we are dealing with a multinational company, or we are dealing with more than one currency, and our currency depreciates against the other foreign currencies, and then what happens is that we have a risk of foreign exchange depreciation, and therefore we may be able to purchase in future at a higher rate than we used to purchase before. Then we have liquidity risk, the risk that we may not be able as an organization to meet our long and short-term debts as and when they fall due. You're talking about the long term, because every long-term asset liability should be having some short-term element. What is going to be paid within the next 12 months? So this is a liquidity risk. The other type of risk that we can talk about is what we call hazard risk. So number 3, we have what we call hazard risk. And when you talk about hazard risk, we are talking about risks like that will end up to have things like liability, torts, property damage, or natural catastrophes. Natural catastrophes. So the hazard risk is that risk that will make an organization unable to meet its or to be able to deal with its operations because there's a hazard that has taken place. There's a hazard that has come into play. For example, property has been damaged due to some flood or due to some, these are natural catastrophe due to flood or due to some fire outbreak or some other hazard. Some natural catastrophes like pandemics and epidemics, like now the COVID-19. If an organization did not plan accordingly, then it will not be able to deal with its risks and ensure that there's what we call business continuity plan or business continuity because of the effect of COVID-19. Many organizations have closed down, and we don't even know if they'll ever come back after the COVID-19 because maybe they did not have a risk management strategy on how they can be able to cope with such hazards like natural catastrophes. So these are some of the risks that an organization can face. And we can also have number 4, what we call strategic risks. Now, when we talk about strategic risks, we are talking about risks on how we are going to manage our organization in terms of what we call competition, on how we are going to deal with social trends and issues to deal capital availability. So these are strategic risks. What are the risks that you don't have a strategic plan? What are the risks that we face as an organization if we don't have a blueprint of where we have been, where we are, and where we are headed? Then, so these are the risks that an organization can face. And then now, we need to look at what are the objectives of an organization? What are some of the objectives of an organization that we need to look at so that we can now be able to appreciate why it is important to be able to manage the risks or to have an enterprise risk management framework. Remember that a risk is anything that is going to make it impossible or to bring challenges as far as the organizational objectives are concerned. What is that can make us not able to meet our organizational objectives? So this is what we call a risk. So let's look at some of the objectives of an organization, and so that you can be able to appreciate that risk can be there for each of these objectives. Now, we are looking at categories of business objectives. Categories of business objectives. And the categories of business objectives would include, number 1, we have what you call strategic objectives. So we have strategic objectives, and these are high level. They are high level goals aligned with and supporting the organization's mission. Aligned with and supporting the mission of an organization. So we are having strategic goals or strategic objectives. And that's why we have had strategic risk, because it is the risk that our strategies may not be arrived at or may not be achieved in the long term. Then we have what we call number 2, we have what we call operation objectives. So we have operational objectives, and these are objectives to ensure there is effective and efficient use of resources and efficient use of resources. So we have operational objectives that we want to effectively and efficiently utilize the resources at our disposal. Those are operational objectives. Then number 3, we can have what we call reporting objectives. We can have what we call reporting objectives. And these reporting objectives are objectives of ensuring that there's reliability in our reporting. So reliability of our reporting. We want to ensure that our reports are reliable to ensure that we have enhanced confidence of the stakeholders. Number 4, we have what we call compliance objectives. And in compliance objectives, we'll talk about the issue to deal with compliance with applicable laws and regulations. So this entails compliance with applicable laws and regulations. We have an objective that we want to comply with the applicable laws and regulations because non-compliance with the laws and regulations can have serious repercussions, including closing down of business. And there are so many businesses that have closed down because of not having complied with laws and regulations. So these are the 4 main objectives of an organization, that it has strategic objectives, the goals or aims that it wants to achieve. There are operational objectives to ensure that resources at the disposal of the organization are effectively and efficiently utilized. We have reporting objectives to ensure that our reports are reliable to enhance confidence of the stakeholders. And we have compliance objectives. That is to ensure that we have complied with the relevant laws and regulations. So then after having said that, we now need to look at the risk management process. And before we look at the risk management process, I want to welcome you to class. I can see Mwalimu Hamisi, Claire, and Alois. Good morning.
Morning.
Yeah, you're well? Okay. Good morning, Alois. Good morning, Mwalimu Hamisi.
Good morning, sir.
Okay. Now, if you have any questions or comments, you can be tickling them in so that you can be able to have a look at them and respond. And I want to look at now the risk management process. And as I said, after looking at a few things, we'll be able to look at a question that has been asked before by a student. Claire had asked a question, and I'm also encouraging us to be, if there's any question that you have during your revision, you can be able to post it on the WhatsApp group so that you can be able to have a look at it and share our responses whenever we have a class like this. Then I will also have to ask you a few questions to see if you are still covering the syllabus in the comfort of your home, or the COVID-19 disruption has stopped learning. So we'll continue with this. Let's look at the risk management process. And I want to look at the steps involved in the risk management process. So now, the first step in the risk management process is what you call establishing context. The first step in the risk management process is establishing the context, and this involves obtaining an understanding. This involves obtaining an understanding of the current conditions, obtaining an understanding of the current conditions in which the organization operates on an internal, external, and risk management context. So here, we first want to establish the context. In other words, we want to understand our operations as an organization. That's why we are talking about the internal operations of the organization, so that you can be able to see if there are any risks that are posed by the internal operations of the organization. Then we look at the external factors, or you're looking at the external environment, such as the political factors, the social factors, the legal factors, and all the external factors, so that you can be able to identify all the risks that are posed by the external environment. Then now we look at our risk management context. In other words, we're looking at the organization's risk appetite and risk framework, so that you can be able to look at, we have seen the internal environment risks, external environment risks, and now we look at our risk management framework. That's where you're going to the risk management context, because the risk management of an entity can differ from another one, depending on the risk appetite of an organization to another. Now, number two, the second step in the risk management process is identifying risks. The second step is identifying risks, which includes documentation. So this refers to documentation of the material threats, This involves documentation of the material threats to the organization, So material threats to the organization's achievement of its objectives. And also, when you're identifying risks, we are also looking at areas that the organization can exploit to obtain a competitive advantage to obtain a competitive advantage. So that is the second. That's the second step in the risk management process, whereby we are identifying all the risks now that the organization is facing, and also now we are looking at those risks and documenting them, because the risk management process must be documented. We must document all the risks that the organization is facing. So we go to the third, we now go to the third step in the risk management process. And the third step in the risk management process is what we call analyzing or quantifying, is what we call analyzing or quantifying the risks. So once we've identified the risks that the organization is facing, then we must now be able to calibrate. So this involves quantification. It involves quantification of the risks the organization is facing. Here, we are going to look at even what we call the likelihood. So we are going to build even probability distributions. So you're going to look at the likelihood of occurrence. And we are going to also include the monetary value. The monetary value. How much do we need, how much are we expected to lose if these risks were to occur in monetary terms? So this is what we call analyzing or quantifying the risks. Number 4, we now do what we call integrating of the risks. So integration of the risks. Here, what we do is so this will include the aggregation. That means we are combining together the effect. So the aggregation of all risk distributions. The aggregation of all risk distributions reflecting correlation and portfolio effects. Correlation and portfolio effects. And the formulation of the results of the results in terms. So we are also formulating the results in terms of impact on the organization's key performance metrics. Impact on the organization is a key performance metrics. In other words, we are now aggregating all the risks into our risk register we talked about before. And in the risk register now we are having the risk name, the description of that risk. And we are now looking at, are there any correlations? Are there any risks that are correlated? And in total now, the total risks that you have taken in the portfolio, what's the impact on the organization as a whole in terms of the organization is a key performance metrics. In other words, we are now looking at all the, if all the risks that we have in the risk register were to materialize or crystallize, how much are we standing to lose, and how far will we have diverted or deviated from our core business or from our strategic objectives. Because risks, as we've said, are those items that will enable or that will make an organization to deviate from its objectives or not to meet its objectives. For example, the country had in place development projects and other strategies that it wanted to meet. But because of the COVID-19, what impact has it had? Because now everything is like it's current, because you've heard from the announcement that I've made, even development funds have been diverted to cater for the matter at hand, which is the risk of the COVID-19 pandemic. So in that way now, we are now looking at what impact has it had in terms of us meeting the objectives that we had in the short and long term. Then we now look at the next step in the risk management process, whereby we are now having what we call assessment. So here we are assessing or prioritizing risks. So our number 5